You and your forebears built our nation. Now, please help us rebuild it.
It was supposed to be a completely ordinary day. The president had come to the Hilton Hotel to deliver a routine speech to members of the Building and Construction Union. Reagan arrived at precisely 1:50 in the afternoon. His speech ended to polite applause around 2:25. White House correspondent Sam Donaldson was covering for ABC News.
Well, I think most of us, when we covered a president, decided that if he was ever in public, we were going to be there, even though that speech didn't amount to a lot.
Donaldson was accompanied by cameraman Hank Brown, seen here with cameramen from CBS and NBC in the unofficial press area near the hotel's VIP entrance. When the speech ended, Donaldson and Brown positioned themselves in the press line, hoping the president might answer a few questions as he walked to his limousine.
I would start rolling on the president coming out, and that's when Sam started to ask the president a question. At the same time, this lady was screaming out, "Mr. Reagan, Mr. President." And his hand goes up, he looks his way, Brady was coming across, and then pow, 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 pow.
To my right, about 5 feet away, John Hinckley shot 6 times. And we all watched the president, at least I did. And I didn't think he'd been hit.
With all eyes straining to see if the president had been shot, the cameras were left to see everything else.
Brady went down more or less in front of me. That's something that, you'll never forget. You don't actually see him get in the head, but you see the blood go across the lens.
Charlie Wilson was covering for CBS.
I hear a couple people cheering, and then what sounds like somebody had set off firecrackers. My initial thought, oh, that's a very funny joke. And then as I see people dropping off, I realize this is no joke.
Shelley Fileman was NBC's cameraman.
When Hinckley went down and started shooting, I would say that I was probably around 1.5 to 2 feet away from him and his gun.
The exact sequence of shots is difficult to determine, but according to a government report, the first shot hits James Brady in the forehead. The second takes down Washington, D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty as he turns to locate the president. Delahanty is hit in the back of the neck. The third shot strikes Agent Tim McCarthy in the chest. 3 bullets, 3 wounded. At least one of them because no one was wearing the customary bulletproof vest.
I didn't wear it. The president didn't wear it. McCarthy didn't wear it. I figured it was such a routine visit that it wasn't necessary to wear it that day.
I welcome this kind of examination. You are free to do as we tell you. You are free to do as we tell you.
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
That's why I don't read the newspaper. I'm a man. I'm 40.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House.
This is crack cocaine from the White House. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
Good evening. This is Mae Bressel in Carmel, California.
Anybody who's not willing to change based on what they learned is ignorant.
Coffee's for closers only.
I think we're giving you enough.
Go on to Chicago and let's win there.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with St. Patrick.
Hi, this is Randy Benson. You're listening to the Midnight Rider News Show with St. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 126, the Reagan assassination attempt, a look back. So tonight we're going to take a brief look back at the 1981 Reagan assassination attempt via two main clips. But first, a little cleaning of the castle. Now Lulu, the site at which we publish Garrison, is running what appears to be at this point weekly specials where you can get 10 to 15% off of print books. And yes, that means us. So you can get both issues of Garrison, pretty often actually, for 10 to 15% off. So go to lulu.com, the main site, to see what the specials are. Now, they usually pop up on the front page of the main site. That's lulu.com, LULU.com. Then you can search for Garrison, or you can go directly to our page at lulu.com/spotlight/Midnight Writer News. Now, if you didn't write that down, or if you don't have that address, you can go to midnightwriternews.com and get that link. We'll be back with more after this.
This is Barbara Honegger, the author of the book October Surprise, on the real story, the deep story, behind the Iran side of the famous Iran-Contra scandal. This is the story of how the Reagan-Bush 1980 election campaign committed high treason by sabotaging President Carter's attempt to free our 52 American hostages then held in Iran. Listen to episode 106 of Midnight Writer News.
Time now for our big board, and our team of insiders standing by with more on today's top stories. Our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, is here at the desk with us for our first story. And Dan, John Hinckley Jr., the man who tried to assassinate President Reagan back in '81, being released from a government psychiatric hospital, a federal judge ruling he no longer poses any risk. A lot of mixed reaction on this, specifically from the Reagan family. Michael tweeting out his father forgave John Hinckley Jr. Maybe we should do the same. But Patty not feeling quite the same, saying just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you should let them loose. What was the legal basis for releasing him?
I know people forget this, but he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. People don't want to talk about that. Not guilty.
How does someone become uninsane?
Exactly. So when you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, the goal then is to cure you, make you better. It's not to punish you. You're not being held to be punished. You're being held so that you can get better. Another thing that we're not talking about is the fact that very often Hinckley's already been out for 17 days and a month. So it's not new that he's going to be out. But what is new is that he could be out completely. And this is a lot based on the doctors. When you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, a lot of your future rests on whether the doctors say this person's a threat, not a threat, etc.
Now, even though he is released, is he released without restrictions?
No, a lot of restrictions.
A lot of restrictions.
Yeah, a lot of restrictions. For example, he's not allowed to get in touch with the news media. He can't get in touch with the Reagan family. He's got to stay within a certain amount of distance from his house. He's got to live with his mother for the first year. He's got to get a job. He's got to check in. The Secret Service has to know where he is, etc., etc., etc. So the judge definitely trying to impose a lot of restrictions here. But to some degree, at some point, you're probably going to have to let him go because he was found not guilty. Wow. You can think that that decision was terrible and wrong, but that was the decision.
The first clip I want to play for you tonight in this little primer is from the late, great John Judge. Now, this is about a 13-minute clip from the Judge for Yourself video, and it focuses specifically on this event, the Reagan assassination attempt of March 1981.
And at first, Haig was going to head up the crisis management team, but then at the last minute, about 3 days before the shooting, Bush was put in to head the crisis management team, and the press couldn't quite figure out what it was, and they were chasing him around saying, what's a crisis, and what's crisis management, and what's this all got to do with? And what it has to do with, of course, is transfer of power and control in either natural or created crises in the White House. And at the level of the presidency. So they asked Bush 3 days before the shooting, how would you define a crisis? And Bush says, the president will know it when he sees it. Flat on his back, I suppose, was the scenario. And I think he did see it coming out of that Hilton there in Washington, and I did extensive work on the ballistics. None of Hinckley's bullets hit Mr. Reagan. Hinckley had 6 bullets in the gun. One hit Delahanty, a cop, and threw him to the ground by nicking him on grazing his shoulder and neck. Another went into the groin of the agent McCarthy. A 160-pound man lifted him up and threw him back to the other end of the limousine. Another bullet, the initial bullet fired by Hinckley, hit Mr. Brady in the head, knocked him to the ground, did considerable brain damage. And one bullet nicked the windshield of the limousine. One bullet went into the Universal office building across the street. And one bullet went into the trunk of the car. And you can see when you look at the photos closely, a very clear hole, not a ricochet or a scar mark, but a hole going into the car, penetrating the outer metal wall. The bullet that hit Reagan hit him by all counts at an early point. When the limousine pulled up to deliver him to his talk, it pulled up at the door where he was to go in. I suppose if you rented a limousine, you'd expect it to come to your door, not 2 doors down the block. If you're the President of the United States, they will move it 6 inches to make it sure it lines up with the door. They were following standard security procedure when he got there. The limousine stopped, the door opened. The Secret Service got out on both sides and formed a human wall. And then Reagan gets out and walks through that wall a couple of seconds into the door of the VIP entrance and through some non-public halls and up an elevator and out on the stage. He comes back by the same route in order to beat the crowd out. This was specifically designed there at the Hilton for that purpose, this route. But when he comes out, the limousine inexplicably is about 40 feet down the curb, nowhere near the door, so he has to walk out into the open. When the President walks in the open, the Secret Service are supposed to stand on either side and to the front and back, as well as other points, but at least a protective diamond. The Secret Service file out all to his right, a line of ducks. They told him that morning, no security problem, Mr. President, you needn't wear your vest. He raised his hand to wave. Someone called Mr. President, raised his hand to wave, and at that point he's hit. You can tell he's hit. In the Kennedy assassination, because the missile went into his lung, the lung begins to collapse, the air is blown out, and the cheeks expand. And you get a grimace on the face. His shoulder slumps a little bit. He's clearly in pain. And all of the magazines, Time magazine, you go back to that point, show Reagan is hit. He's up like this. But that point is at almost the same second that Hinckley's first bullet is fired and hits Brady in the head. And realizing that Reagan is not dead, Secret Service Agent Parr begins to push him into the car in front of him. And Reagan's already in the car, and Parr about a third of the way into the car when Hinckley's last shot is fired. So there's no chance in timing or angles or anything else for these bullets to hit Reagan. The reaction of all the other people is much different than Reagan. Reagan's still standing, and then he gets into the car. So they're all lying around the ground from these 38 shots. If a 38 caliber, even a 22 caliber bullet had hit Reagan, he wouldn't have been wondering whether something had happened to him. A good assassin, even if you have your vest on, knows that when you raise your hand, you expose your heart. Oh. And the situation was that up top of the retaining wall on the area that I call the bushy knoll was the assassin. And he was firing not a 38 or a 22, but a very, very specific weapon developed by the intelligence agencies, which is a CO2-propelled flechette. These are little razor-edged or sharp discs, or they have them, earlier versions were like little tube rockets, about a ½ an inch long, very thin with stabilizing fins. Then they got into these little discs that are razor-edged and delta-shaped or airline shaped, so that they, and this thing makes no noise. It's just a little puff of the CO2 gas, and it can be fired with accuracy up to an amazing distance. Some of the guns that incorporated this early technology were revealed by Senator Church during the CIA assassination studies in Congress, and they had looked like a German Luger with a rifle scope on it that would fire these things accurately with the scope to the length of a football field. So there's no problem with aiming them or getting them to do the job. And I have to assume that Luger was the expendable technology, and they got better or they wouldn't show it to us on TV. And they could shoot you from a satellite. They don't have to worry about a gun barrel. But not with a 22, of course, but with other types of energy and heat generating stuff they can send down by satellite. And if they can knock a ICBM missile traveling through outer space out of the sky, I'm sure they can catch you on the street. So once they get Star Wars in place, the cities are the first target, I think. They can start firestorms and other things. But this guy made such a little wound with this disc. They often contain poison, and might have in Reagan's case, that later led to the cancer, but also can just be used. I think the idea was to penetrate the heart, but it deflected on the 7th rib and went into the lung and missed the aorta by about 1/4 of an inch. They couldn't find the bullet. The nurses couldn't find a bullet wound. And now this is GWU Hospital emergency room in D.C. They've seen bullet wounds, believe me. They didn't know what was wrong. They thought he was having a heart attack. Finally, when they got all his clothes cut off, the nurse saw what she described, and I read the medical magazines about this, and she said it was a little razor slit, about 1 inch long with some black blood coming out of it, a little line of blood. And then she thought, well, maybe he's been hit with something. But that isn't what a 22 or a 38 hole would look like. And then they went in and they couldn't find it, and they almost closed him up. They did 3 different x-rays to find the bullet. And then the doctor, the last time, just before closing, got the thing in his hand and his lung tissue and pulled it out. And he described it in the medical magazine as round, flat as a dime, as round as a dime, about that size, and flat, razor edged. And then he hands it to the FBI that's waiting patiently. And it goes the way of all good bullets, back into the history bin. So we don't hear about that bullet anymore. We hear about these 22 exploding shells and ricochet shot that must have hit the back of the car and gone between the door of the car and gotten into Reagan on his way in. Because otherwise, how do you explain the wound described by Dr. O'Donnell that night at the press conference as a 45-degree downward, back to front, left to right wound? When you have Reagan here and Hinckley down about where you are. How are you going to get me from back there? It just didn't fit. So then you got to bend Reagan over like this, have the bullet ricochet, and come back in from the other side of the car or something. I mean, it was almost as impossible as the magic bullet in the Kennedy assassination, but these are minor details when you're killing a president. They did not expect him to survive. They got into the car without even police escort, and they yelled, "Rawhide is okay." Rawhide being his code name at the time. Rawhide is okay. Oops, gig's up. So next, plan B. And Brady at that point is lying on the ground bleeding. And there is an early report that Brady is dead. Then there's a report that Reagan is shot. Then that Brady's shot or not dead, or Reagan's not dead, or Reagan's dead. And it went back and forth like that for a while. The press couldn't seem to get it straight. And I'm turning on everything I can turn on, radio and TV, the minute I hear it, because I know you're going to get the only news in the first few minutes. And the situation is somebody comes into GWU Hospital on a stretcher. Secret Service all around. And they come in a few minutes before and they clear out the emergency room, and they bring this guy through on the stretcher. So everybody assumes it's Reagan, he's hit, maybe he's dead, and he's going into surgery. But in fact, having looked at the case very closely, I now realize that that was Brady. Brady beat Reagan to the hospital. Brady, who took 3 more minutes to even get an ambulance near him, got to GWU before Reagan did. And then in the book that McCarthy writes about protecting the president that day, he says that they got in the car and they said they were going to take him to the nearest hospital, that's what you got to do. And so they went up T Street to Connecticut, and they said into the thing, "We're going right. We're going to," and then he says another code word. He doesn't put it in there, but he says it means the White House. And if you go right on Connecticut Avenue at T Street in Washington, D.C., you're heading north, away from the White House, and up to another place in Maryland where the body of John Kennedy got taken, called Bethesda Naval Hospital, so that the United States Navy intelligence can finish the job on Mr. Reagan. In fact, Secret Service agents argued with hospital staff at GW all night until 6 in the morning. They finally gave up trying to move him up to Bethesda. They wanted to do the killing and the autopsy up there, where they could control it. They didn't want him down to a public hospital. But a huge fight broke out between the Reagan loyalists and the Bush loyalists in the Situation Room in that hour. At the Command and Control Module, which is the communication module in the White House for all the nuclear and crisis commands, sat Helena von Dahm, Reagan's appointments secretary and Otto von Bolschwing's employee. And the fight ensued to the point that a deal was made to let Reagan live, as long as he got out of the way. Haig emerged, shaken, Bush's man, and said, "Gentlemen, I am in charge here until the vice president returns." Bush was flying out in Dallas on Air Force One, and so the transition of power, I believe, happened at that point. Hinckley was an easy enough patsy to set up and blame the murder on. Reagan managed to survive, but then from then on basically went out to Camp David, watched old movies with Nancy, waved at the press, "Oh, I'm the president, I want to see my boots," and Bush ran the White House.
Well, the second clip we have for you tonight is by Jason Burmis. Now, some of you may have heard of him. He's one of the guys that did the Loose Change video about 9/11, and this one is from a documentary that he did called Invisible Empire. Here it is.
So that he did have a CIA connection.
Bush left the CIA just under a year after his appointment. He is credited with restoring the agency's morale, as its image was being shattered by the Church Committee's revelations of the CIA's unauthorized activities involving assassinations and corruption. In reality, Bush was responsible for denying the Church Committee many of the documents it requested, and making it impossible for them to do a thorough investigation. After his time as CIA director, he devoted himself to becoming the next president of the United States. Many people within his own party did not like his globalist ties.
Along the campaign trail, Bush continually had to explain his association with the group.
J.R. Ewing in the show Dallas. J.R. is a member of the Trilateral Commission, I think. It's got to be because it's so bad. Let me tell you something. I used to be a member of it. I resigned, as I did from every business thing I was in, to concentrate on one thing: running for president of the United States.
Ronald Reagan initially had no interest in having Bush as his running mate.
Even then presidential candidate Ronald Reagan had questions.
I would suggest that maybe Mr. Bush would clear the air if he'd tell us why he resigned.
Reagan's backers then forced him to choose their intelligence frontman, George H.W. Bush, as his vice president.
But in spite of last year's campaign rhetoric, all seems to be back to normal between George Bush and his old colleagues. And President Reagan, who is relying on many of these powerful business leaders to make his economic package work, will host commission representatives at the White House Monday.
After Reagan's election, there was an attempt on his life, just 69 days into office. Astoundingly, Bush would again be connected.
So just who is John Hinckley Jr.?
When he left this neighborhood 8 years ago, he was, by all accounts, well-liked and seemingly normal.
This donut shop near the motel was visited by Hinckley, who reportedly waited for a phone call here each day, even though he had a phone in his motel room. The nature of the calls is not known.
A touch of irony. The young man walking with the elder Hinckley is 30-year-old Scott Hinckley, John Jr.'s brother. He and Vice President Bush's son, Neil, are friends. They had planned to have dinner together in Denver tonight. The plans have been canceled.
We were told Hinckley was a madman acting alone. If that was the case, why was he making phone calls from a payphone down the road instead of his hotel room? Why was the would-be assassin's brother a family friend of the man who stood to gain the presidency?
So actually, we're going to have a third clip tonight, and It's the godmother of truth, Mae Brussell, and she's discussing the Reagan assassination attempt, as well as the comparison of the JFK assassination, with Professor Ray Fabrizio of Monterey College. Now, this episode was actually broadcast on April 12, 1981, so we're talking it's less than 2 weeks after the attempt, and Mae, as she did so well, is already completely covering the story like no one else. Now, I'm not sure why she always says Reagan rather than Reagan, because it's a little confusing with Donald Reagan. But anyway, Mae is unmatched. She was the best. And here she is with Professor Fabrizio.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, and this is tape number 488, broadcast number 488, April the 12th, 1981. I have a guest with me this evening, Ray Fabrizio, professor for Monterey Peninsula College, an accomplished musician here on the Monterey Peninsula, who has time to teach and to do his music and also to study current events constantly and turn the students on to what's happening. I've been very lucky on this peninsula. I've been able to express my opinions and research for 9 years at KLRB, and I've been lucky also 2 semesters. Ray and I taught a class at Monterey Peninsula College on the American assassinations, and thanks to Ray and his constant working with young people, we've been able to reach people in this community who've gone over other places elsewhere, and a lot that he's done has reached many, many people. Before I introduce you to Ray, I just want to say I have a book that I really like very much, and it has a list of ways to make life rich and full of meaning. And I was looking at it this week, and I was thinking it describes Ray Fabrizio and the relationship that he has with his research, or that I've known him. It was a book on creative thinking, and the first item was a desire to make things better, alertness to be open to everything, an interest in digging below the surface, curiosity, a constant spirit of inquiry, thoughtfulness leading to thorough understanding, concentration to penetrate matters in depth, the application of your energy and effort, patience to solve problems in detail, optimism, combining enthusiasm and self-confidence, and cooperation, working productively with others. I think those 10 things are very important for the people that I like and respect, and Ray is one of those people. It's really been wonderful knowing you and working with you on this peninsula and sharing information constantly.
Well, thanks, Mia. Gosh, I hope that I have just a few of those qualities that you mentioned, and I think I have also I don't know about the depth. I spread myself so thin. I do have the interest and the awareness, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to devote to these things that I would like to have.
I think you have the depth. I think throwing out new ideas every time there is a holiday, a remembrance of John Kennedy's assassination, or the shooting of John Lennon, or this evening we're going to talk about the near murder or the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan and the comparisons to the John Kennedy assassination, just alerting people to the possibility that there are similarities and sharing them with your students. They always come back, and I hear from them that you're opening up new doors and areas that other people are afraid to do. They're afraid to go into it, and you bring out the possibility, is there more than we're seeing? And that is important. You don't have to tell them what they'll find at the end of the tunnel, but at least tell them to explore it.
Exactly, and I do try to give them hints on how to detect propaganda and how to know when they're being lied to, and then they can be on their own. This is very important, and they need the encouragement to know that someone older with more experience has the same kinds of doubts and questions, and they shouldn't be afraid to doubt and question themselves. This is my job as a teacher, I think.
Well, last week when the shooting took place of Ronald Reagan, I got a phone call from a gentleman on the peninsula who is retired now. He's in the highest levels of military intelligence and in the Army. He was the interpreter at the Gary Powers trial. Peter Thomas, do you know him? He lives on the peninsula.
I know of him.
Yeah, and he's a close friend of mine, and he interpreted for Khrushchev and for Gary Powers, speaks Russian, German, and English. And he was talking about the Reagan shooting, and he believes in the research that we're doing. He said the truth will set you free. He's not afraid of truth coming out. And I said, well, what will we do when another layer of cover-up comes? And he said, do what you're doing, reach the young people, and keep telling them the truth. And eventually forget about the older ones and get to the young people so they can see it. And that's what you do at the college. I hear all the time from the different classes.
Well, I hope I reach a few. I know you do. A lot of my students listen to your show regularly.
Oh, I have one apology now, and then we're going to go on to this evening. It's going to be the comparisons of patterns between the murder of John Kennedy specifically and the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. I have to apologize to my listeners. Last week, a play of words and kind of a little joke, I kept talking about John Warlock Hinkle.
Warlock, right.
Warlock Hinkle. Yeah. Well, there was one article in the paper that he got a job as a disc jockey at a station using the name Warlock. And I did it half as a joke, knowing that the Warlock would link eventually to the Manson family and the whole cast of lies. And the Hinckley reminded me of Warren Hinkle, a double agent in San Francisco who I detest. So it was kind of an in-joke of Warlock Hinkle. And then this week, this clone, this Edward Richardson, appeared in New Haven, Connecticut, and New York, who was in the nearby area of Colorado, whose paths crossed with Hinckley, John Hinckley. And he said his hero was the Manson family and Squeaky Fromm and the SLA. So, and that we have a whole team of assassins, and his mentor is Carl McIntyre and the Deep Christian Church. So I knew within a week the Warlock would tie in. The whole mystical thing would go in too long to cover now, and I won't do any more in-jokes. We'll call him John Hinckley Jr., right. But I still want to call him Warlock. Okay? Now, on to the gross similarities. What are the ones, some of those that you notice, that people, young people or older people should be noticing in this case? Well,
I noticed right from the beginning, from the earliest videotapes, that there was a lot of contradiction between what I saw and what the press was explaining that I saw. For example, the shots. The three men who were hit react violently to shots, and yet we see the president being pushed into the car. And I've studied the videotapes quite closely, and I'm going to get 5 more hours of them by next week, which I'll study even more closely. But I'm convinced that Reagan was not hit. If he was hit, it was by a very different kind of bullet, or if he was hit after he got into the car. The reason why I say that is that we can see McCarthy, the Secret Service man, being literally lifted off his feet by one of the shots. We can see, of course, that the police officer and Brady are felled immediately, and to lift a 179-pound man, McCarthy, off the ground requires a high-powered rifle, and also he was thrown, I would say 5 to 6 feet to our right. That is, as from the view of the camera, he's thrown right. I would say 5 or 6 feet. That would be consistent with a shot from our left, from somewhere else, where everybody, by the way, was looking as soon as the shots rang out.
From somewhere else.
All the eyes are in that direction, and then Hinckley is back here where the camera is. Now that's an indication of more than the possibility of shots from more than one direction.
Different. Also, and for those of the listeners who are too young or don't remember the Dallas comparison, when John Kennedy was shot through the throat or through the back, or John Connally, they were fairly clean bullets. And then his head exploded and the brain crashed, and that was messy. In this case, 3 men were messy, and Reagan was clean. The response was totally different.
That's right.
Coming from one gun.
And we have shots coming from the rear. The shot that went through Connally is definitely from the rear.
It was a clean bullet, though.
That was a clean bullet.
Came out pristine. It was so clean.
That's right.
Yeah, but the response of Reagan, the first story was that he walks into the hospital on his own feet, or was just thrown to the car for protection. And the reaction of Ronald Reagan was entirely different than the other 3 men.
That's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing, too, the photos are so important, I think, in both in both assassinations, JFK and the assassination attempt on President Reagan. I'm interested in the photos that must exist that were taken by newsmen standing next to the car and behind the car, photographing from the, in other words, photographing the whole action from the opposite point of view. In other words, Hinckley would be in these photographs.
They said they would show us those, but they never did.
They haven't yet.
They said they would.
And that should solve any doubts about Hinckley and his friend there. I'm sure you'll mention it.
Yeah, well, we'll get it. Well, that is consistent with the Warren Commission using and confiscating immediately the film of Abraham Zapruder standing on the side of the car where John Kennedy was hit from the one side, and then individual researchers, such as Richard Sprague, collecting 25,000 different photos or feet of pictures across the street where there is possibly a gunman or a man standing at the Daltex window on the stepway, and a Mr. Hicks of the security department picking up shells. And the view was entirely different from the other side you might have gotten in researchers through the years, including the tramps being taken away and so forth. The Zapruder film only caught the fact that the president was killed.
That's right. And if these, of course, this kind of withholding of vital evidence, if these films were, if people were interested, if the FBI were really interested in solving these crimes, all they need to do is collect these photographs, and by triangulating them, we would know exactly which shots were fired, and as we can reconstruct now in Dealey Plaza.
Of course, that's another comparison. You have that quotation I gave you of the FBI. You say, if they were interested, and yet, for all purposes, the case was solved, within
That's
3
right.
days.
They said that we've got, there he is.
Yeah, we've got the case for all, we have no evidence of a conspiracy, the FBI said. We have some sheets here, you'll hear papers rattling with a description of the FBI, will come across them, saying, for all purposes, nobody else was involved.
Right.
The men investigating the case and the Justice Department.
Another important parallel that I see is another parallel is the importance of eyewitnesses interviewed on the scene right after the events. You'll recall the eyewitnesses at Dealey Plaza in Dallas spoke of shots coming from the grassy knoll. I mean, the overwhelming majority of them. Other eyewitnesses heard shots from other directions too. And yet the Warren Commission chose to believe that all the shots came from the one
man
from the one man again. Now, eyewitnesses when the shots were fired at Reagan, first said that they did not see Reagan hit. They also the reports for an hour, I believe, were that the president had not been hit. Now, I think these eyewitness accounts are very interesting. Later on in the day, when these same videotapes were being replayed, the eyewitness remarks were cut out of the tapes.
Well, the original tapes, though, whoever videotaped it right away got
those.
Even got a reference to the grassy knoll.
That's right.
They pointed to the wall and said they came from the grassy knoll.
I think somebody was trying to be funny, but it had real relevance.
Yeah.
Because one of the eyewitnesses spoke of seeing someone shooting from up there. There was some reference to a higher shot.
Yeah.
And also...
Sherman Skolnick said that I talked to him today. He's a well-known researcher in Chicago, and he said that one of the witnesses who hasn't been interviewed since then, a woman, and it wasn't Judy Woodruff, who was staying near the NBC camera. It was somebody that said they heard a crackling fire and suggested even the roof, the trajectory of higher up at the Hilton Hotel, that there was this sound coming from a crackling noise that they picked up, and this person has never been located. And also...
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly in one of the early videotapings, there was a young eyewitness, a young man, who was asked by one of the reporters, did you see the president hit? And he said, no, I didn't see him hit. When the shots rang out and when he was being pushed in the car, I could see that his face showed concern and that he was startled. And then he started to say more, but there was a fellow, a very imposing tall and strong fellow behind him happened to be a black man who looked sort of hippie-ish, but you knew he wasn't. He was, and in a voice of quiet authority, he said, "Hold up, man. Now hold up there."
Didn't want him to talk?
Didn't want him to talk. And the young man turned around quite,
Did you get on the tape?
This is on the tape.
On the videotape.
This will undoubtedly be on the 5 hours of tape that I'm going to get from a friend next time, but I distinctly remember that.
Now, the changing of the trajectory of the bullets, one gun expert told me that in order to try and kill somebody, you aim for the arm or armpit because it can go down to the heart if it's higher up, and if they wear a bulletproof vest, you're sure to get them. You go for the armpit and it goes down. Now, if there were somebody, again, on a roof, maybe with a silencer, with that crackling sound simultaneously, and his arm is raised, that would explain how it went 1 inch from the heart and went in the armpit.
That's right. That would explain, however, this would have had to happen pretty much as Reagan was pushed into the car, because as he is pushed into the car, he shows no sign of being hit by any high-powered rifle.
Until he gets in the car.
Well, we know that when he got in the car, he complained that the Secret Service agent Parr, is that his name?
This is something we were talking about that isn't a comparison to Kennedy, because he was good and dead.
That's right.
The interesting point is that, like you're saying, Ronald Reagan fell down and blamed the agent for breaking his rib, which would be similar to the Robert Kennedy assassination. Say if he had lived where Thane Caesar is behind him and shoots from behind, if he wasn't 1 inch from the back of the head, say the shoulder hit, where they later removed the ceiling from the ambassador and cut off the sleeve where the shots came from behind, was Ronald Reagan in the car. And that anguish on his face is that he got a bullet into the area and collapsed and blamed his fall on cracking a rib.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In any case, Reagan's wound is not consistent with a shot fired from ground level. It's not consistent with a shot fired because he was pushed into the car, and as he's bending down, the shot would go up, right? All of the diagrams showing Reagan's wound show a very, very clean wound angling down from his armpit.
And then it changes course.
Off the rib, and then it lodges in the lung. Well,
this is like the Dallas story again. These bullets do the zigzags. They don't just go down. They ricochet. They change course. They go back up, and then they go down again.
Here's another parallel. The changing of the evidence with regard to wounds. The nature of the wounds are very important in any murder case.
And the very first day, you get an exact diagram.
Yes.
Of the bullet and the wound.
Now, they say it's a ricochet. Of course, we'll talk about that, I guess, in a minute, why they had to have 6 shots. But a ricochet bullet becomes very deformed, and it doesn't follow a neat path in any body.
So for the time it hits, then it breaks, you mean?
That's right. In other words, it's very difficult for me to buy the story that Reagan was hit by a ricochet bullet. But the ricochet bullet story, to me, must be an attempt to restrict the bullets to 6, because if we got another bullet, we've got a conspiracy. Political conspiracies don't happen in this country, right? They only happen in the Banana Republic.
Well, of course, the photographing of this scene and the photographing of Dallas are the same, and then the one you had to fit the amount of bullets into the Mannlicher Carcano in the certain amount of seconds that the film was going. And in this case, you can't have more than 6, so if you have 7 bullets, one of them has to be not from where John Hinckley was standing, but from the car, which is a different direction, isn't it?
That's right, or from the front of the car. I counted the bullets. Now, at first they said that the police officer was hit by 2 bullets. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he was hit by 1 bullet, which injured his shoulder and his neck. All right, we've got McCarthy, the Secret Service man, hit once. We've got the police officer, Delaney, I believe. He's hit once. We've got Brady hit once. We've got Reagan hit once. We've got the door hit once. We've got the window hit once, and we've got a hole in the building across the street, which I thought was a bank, but you said might
it'd be an insurance company or a bank.
Now that's 7. That's even granting them 1 shot to the police officer
in 3 seconds.
In
less than 3 seconds, almost.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
the
know
timing was actually less than 3 seconds.
No.
And 3 were felled to the ground, and the other one is singing and dancing and wishing he was in Philadelphia, right? Yeah. With blood coming out of his nose and mouth.
Yes. That's another parallel. The contradictory reports about the president's reactions to his wound.
Well, the very first confusion was so obvious when they said it was a .38 caliber. This is on the tapes.
Right.
And then it became a .22. Well, the minute John Kennedy was put into Parkland Hospital and Lee Harvey Oswald became the suspect, they were walking out of the building with the Mannlicher, with the German Mauser.
German Mauser.
And identified by the law enforcement. And that took them 24 hours to become a Mannlicher Carcano.
Right.
Now, this Hinckley, they jumped the gun on two things. Just like with Lee Harvey Oswald, they said it was the German Mauser. And there were Mausers in the building.
That's
then,
right.
Remember there were two Mausers in the building?
In a different spot, though.
Yeah. Oswald, when he was arrested, said, wait, there's Mausers in the building. Then it became a Carcano. Well, in this case, he had bought a .38, one in Dallas that was confiscated at Nashville, and then he bought a .38 in Denver, Colorado on January 21st of this year. So right away they said it was a .38, and then all of a sudden they said, no, it's a .22, because he bought that from poor old Mr. Goldstein. We'll get into that. And it became a .22, but where did they get the confusion, again, about the nature of the bullets, or 3 days later saying that they're hollow bullets?
That they're hollow bullets or explosive, and that was another fuzzy thing, the difference between explosive bullets and hollow had poison-filled bullets with poison cartridges in. You know, going back to the Mauser and Carcano, maybe our listeners should maybe they don't understand that the German Mauser rifle is generally considered by experts in firearms to be one of the most deadly and deadly accurate weapons for any kind of killing. And the Italian Carcano is universally recognized as the worst. It's completely outdated. So we're not talking about just an unimportant point here. In other words, if a .38 was used, we might be able to explain the force of the missile that hit McCarthy.
Totally different.
Totally different.
The three of them, yes, and then the one little .22.
Right. Yeah, this is a parallel which is very important because the hard evidence, the ballistics evidence, is so essential. And of course, the ballistics evidence was messed up and messed with very early on in the Kennedy assassination.
So what we get is a difference in what the weapon was, a difference in the direction, a discrepancy on how many could go out in a given time. The witnesses that had one version that are never called to present themselves. Mm-hmm. The one thing you're getting in this case is the silence of the surgeons you mentioned.
Yes, to this moment, they've never been interviewed.
Never been seen. They're not going to go on a limb like Commander Hume and say it went this way or that way.
All of the doctors at Parkland Hospital, for example, for I think it was a day and a half, said that the first shot that hit Kennedy in the neck was an entrance shot. Well, after the FBI interviewed them, then it suddenly became an exit wound, you know, and then it makes these doctors look silly. So I can appreciate the fact that they might not want to go out on a limb describing the real operation that was performed on our president now.
One of the points of the comparisons that I made note is that at the time that John Kennedy was killed, the Secret Service and all the people made a run in a different direction than when Lee Harvey Oswald was. And in this case, everyone was looking in a different place than where John Hinckley.
They were looking straight ahead, and Hinckley was to their left.
Up to the left,
That's
yes.
Right. And also, well, yeah, finish.
No, go on.
Sorry,
that's okay.
there's so much to talk about.
We could do 3 hours.
But I find it very suspicious. There's another parallel here. I found it suspicious that the president had to walk so far to the limousine from this exit that the car was not parked directly in front of the exit, which seems to me to be the safest thing to do.
He had to make a slant.
He had to turn. Yes, he had to walk quite a ways, and the car was a weird slant right at the curve of that drive. Now, in the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, we see very clearly that the presidential limousine slows slows down as they approach.
Stops.
It almost stops when it gets to the grassy knoll area.
Uh-huh.
And these are very suspicious things.
They didn't
one would not
escalate
expect.
till after he was hit.
Until
And in this
after the
case,
shots.
they had him walking farther at an angle, which would be really difficult. I also think if he was walking straight from the door to the car, probably through the arm or something, there'd be less chance of getting the heart. At the angle that he was at, he was more at an angle where it'd be easier to get him.
Well, I think the parallel in both cases, yeah, that's true. The parallel in both cases is that both moves put the president in greater danger, contrary to standard Secret Service procedure.
Yeah.
In other words, well, you get into the secret.
Well,
you've got a note there about the parallels, about the protecting of the president.
Yeah.
All of these rules that are violated, standard practices violated by the Secret Service in both instances.
The favors of law enforcement. Well, one of the shocking articles was in the Washington Post this week, April 3rd, where Mr. Knight, Director Stuart Knight of the Secret Service, said that this potential assassin was in the audience right on the street, a known potential assassin, well known to the Secret Service as a possible threat, was in the crowd of onlookers. And the diversionary in all of this was John. He was acting up, even though he was a known threat, and people were watching him, when it was John Hinckley who really was just standing there. And they didn't apprehend him or take him off the street, and Mr. Knight said the person that people thought was Hinckley, acting like a herky-jerky manner he uses, I don't know where he gets that from, just before the shots rang out, was already a known person in the Secret Service, and they ascertained that he posed no threat. Well, was he ever frisked? If everybody is looking at the single hand going out, is that the only one that's shooting? Mm-hmm. It's such a posture to stick your hand straight out, of this motley group and just throw away those bullets.
There was no question in my mind, looking at the videotapes, that hand was firing shots. You can see the pistol recoil, but this business of he's the one, this propensity to think, to make us believe that when you find one man, you've solved the crime.
Well, that's like Sirhan's attorney saying when it came out that there was evidence of a second gun. He said, well, being as my client was there with the intent to shoot, he's guilty anyway. It doesn't matter, with the intent. Sirhan could be a diversionary shooting around the place where the fatal bullet comes from behind, from a security guard. So what you get here is a situation where the security guards are all looking at one man and jumping him. Mm-hmm. Where did the herky-jerky guy go that was the risk?
That's right. And
well, did they run and grab him, too? If they, a herky-jerky, I don't think Mr. Stuart Knight uses that often. He's making all the funny faces, and he's the diversionary. Did anyone run for him?
Obviously not.
Maybe he was holding the .38 that Hinckley got in. Who knows what the guys were hit from, and maybe Hinckley was working with somebody on the street. They all ran for the one person.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a real peril. It's got to be a lone assassin. They come on the air immediately after all political assassinations in this country. Some authority comes on the air immediately, even before the facts are in, even before all of the elementary facts are in, and they say no conspiracy.
Well, this is why I think Jack Ruby's murder of Lee Harvey Oswald was done on camera, because if you saw him shoot, somebody else wasn't holding his hand, and therefore there was no conspiracy. They don't go into the telephone call or really go to probe of how he knew what time Oswald would come through the basement or how he got into the basement. If you saw him shoot, therefore he did it alone. And if you see John Hinckley there, he did it alone. Mm-hmm. And you saw his hand, didn't you?
You saw his hand, didn't you?
Time Magazine and Newsweek, and they all have it. This is the end of the first half hour. We're going to take a 1-minute break. This goes too fast.
Already?
Isn't that terrible? We'll take a break. This is Mae Brussel and Ray Fabrizio and Carmel, and we'll be back with you in 1 minute. Okay, this is Mae Brussel and Ray Fabrizio, and we'll go back with some more comparisons of the John Kennedy assassination and the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, because I think Ray and I both agree he probably won't outlive, for one reason or another, he's not going to go through these 4 years as president. He's been marked. So for all purposes, this is just the first gun, don't you think?
I'm afraid so.
I think so. There were other comparisons I just want to mention briefly, and I'll do more of this next week when I'm on the air. This January in 1981, in front of my house, January the 13th, there was a very suspicious car I could see from my window in the study, and I looked up, and this white car was sitting there with a male in there, and I asked them what they were doing. They were about 10 minutes, and they were looking for a room to rent in my house. The woman said she had been there before, an older woman, about 5 or 6 years older than the man, and he was spaced out on, it looked like drugs, and she looked like a tired kind of a hippie. And I made a note that he was 24 years old and stocky and a wide face, and they said that somebody in the house spoke German, and if I didn't have a room for them, maybe he could do some electrical work for me. And I asked to see his driver's license. It was 517 TSF, and he said his name was John Randall, and that he lived in Santa Barbara. And I typed all this up because I was going to L.A. the next day, and made note that he appeared to have this sort of Artie Bremer face, and he wouldn't answer questions, and she did the talking, and I asked him if he would talk. And I remembered just this week the John and the white automobile and Ronald Reagan's home base in Santa Barbara, and John Hinckley being in California very often and not accounted for from October the 9th of 1980 until January 21st, 1981, where he shows up in Colorado. And I called the FBI and the Secret Service. They said the name on the license does not match this John Randall, whoever he was. And I had told a member of my family, I think I've seen the stormtrooper in front of the house. For all the world, he looked like a Nazi stormtrooper. So when the story came out about this John Hinckley, was interesting to me. He was about the same age, 1 year difference, the same body description, the same appearance, the same spaced out description that the motel people gave in Colorado just before he came to California. And his interest in the Kennedy assassination is, I understand, in Colorado, there's locked up in his family's home all these articles about Kennedy and John Lennon, and I had been for years doing connections of the Nazi Party, the Kennedy assassination, and the conspiracy of John Lennon. And he had a lot of satisfaction in the Lennon murder and was consumed with the researchers, and even had a picture of Oswald with him when he was doing these shootings. So I'll follow more next week on this subject, but I was calling the Secret Service and the FBI. This was Thursday night, and Friday morning at 8:30 in the morning, I got a telephone call from Marina Oswald in Texas, and Ray and I were talking about that before we went on the air. And I'll share that with you later. I don't want to divert from what we're doing, but I just, the people that take the tapes every week and are interested in this as a running process of understanding what is going on, I thought it was interesting that Marina called me, and we talked for about a half hour, because I was looking into the possibility of the Hinckley family and the oil engineers in Texas working with Marina and the people that she knew in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it was quite a shock to get a call from her and talk about these matters just at the time I was investigating them. Now let's get back to the other coincidences or similarities, whatever they are. I don't think they're coincidences.
No, I'm afraid not. Maybe one, you have so much interesting stuff to get into. I don't want to take too much time here, no. But I think another parallel that is obvious is the need to create a motive for these, quote, lone assassins. You know, I mean, they said that Lee Harvey Oswald killed, I mean, after all, you have to have a motive, right? Well, Lee Harvey Oswald was dead, so they could create any motive they wanted. And the story, the official story, is that Oswald killed Kennedy in order to go down in history.
The history. Oh, that's...
And yet he denied, of course, the motive. This motive is so absurd because a man who wants to go down in history as a killer of a president would proudly proclaim it, yet Oswald denied it always. Now, they've come up with a motive for Hinckley.
Yes.
He's in love with... I guess you mentioned that in your last tape, though, didn't you?
Well, a little bit. I mean, he wanted to be known as a person, you know, historical in stature to prove his love for her.
Right.
A nobody who wanders. Well, you know, I've often said you take people that work in espionage like E. Howard Hunt, his children didn't even know he was a master spy for 20 years until Watergate. They don't go to known places. They don't have neon signs.
Of course not. They don't leave diaries. I think it's peculiar. It's only, it seems to me, this, and I don't mean this in any unpatriotic sense, but it's only Americans who seem to believe these Disneyland stories. You know, can you imagine a European believing
that you leave notes around?
These stories, they can't even come up with really sophisticated stories. To me, they're patently suspicious.
Well, I think that in order to close the case within 24 hours, you have to have the motive right there. And the adjectives that they've used, which we compare, say, the Kennedy assassination tonight to John Hinckley, were used also with Sirhan Sirhan, charged with killing Robert Kennedy, James Earl Ray, with Martin Luther King, with Artie Bremer, the Wallace shooting, the SLA with their writings on the wall, or the Manson family, death to the pigs, and these notorious diaries are supposed to divert you from these lonely wanderers who go in and out of countries, who have passports, who, like John Hinckley, graduates from high school and travels for 7 years without only one arrest, and he's out in 34 minutes, staying Delta Airlines, American Airlines, the Sheraton hotels, motels with swimming pools. He has a car. He leaves at his parents' house. They tell you how he's going back and forth, the Dan White story, to McDonald's for hamburgers. Well, what about that white Valeri car he had, or whatever it was? You know, he has wheels. He has gas. It costs money as much as us. He's in college a few years. He's up in Illinois. He's in Washington, D.C., where he's pictured in front of the White House. Lee Harvey Oswald, you know, the route from the Marines to home base to New Orleans to Paris and Le Havre and Finland and Moscow, and then back home, and the government pays his way. A loner rejected every time.
The loner rejected.
James Earl Ray's in London. He's in Portugal. He's up in Montreal. They're all over the world.
I've often wondered what there is about these concocted, simplistic stories that Americans seem to eat up. I think it's that I think we desperately want to believe that that political assassination is simply a non-American phenomenon, and we'll go so far as to believe these cartoon fictions.
Yeah. Well, see, the problem is that we will accept that bullets fly. We will recognize the president of Jamaica when 27 people plus more were murdered for him to be elected. Or the president of Korea comes in at the dinner he shoots his successor. Right. We get Pinochet, who actually guns down, literally, you know, Salvador Allende. Everyone we're recognizing came in through the absolute slaying of the people before them. And then we can't say that the vice president or the secretary of state wants the power now because their espionage system is getting unglued because of multinational banking scandals and the involvement of CIA with Nazis and narcotics. We can't say we've got to cover the gaps, and Reagan's too new in Washington. We can't. I have the luxury of saying that thanks to my audience and friends, but the average person doesn't have the luxury of even saying it out loud. You know, even thinking the worst and proving it was wrong.
Yes.
Much less thinking the worst and proving it was true.
That's right.
So that everyone they entertain is a gangland banana republic crook. And we want to pretend that the succession is orderly and that this loner.
Yes. All we need is more psychiatrists to keep our kids from being, you know, toilet trained too early because they end up killing presidents. You know, I mean, that's the. Well,
you know, you go to the hotel room and there's a letter to Jodie Foster, and the headline says the motive is there. Yes. The lonely wanderer, and that they were neglected by everybody. Society never recognized them. He wanted to be like his brother, and he wanted to be like his sister, the homecoming queen, and he just went to. There's a Yiddish word, Nebish College.
Right.
It's not the Harvard of the South. Well, Vanderbilt isn't Harvard either. They have to put that in, that it's the Harvard of the South. It's still just old Vanderbilt.
Yeah. You know, there's another parallel there to the cooperation of the press. Was so necessary in the Kennedy assassination, and it's so necessary now. The press answers the questions at the same time that they're asked, and they're neat little answers for people who don't want to delve into them.
I spent the whole week just taking the Washington Post, the 2 pages in that, last Sunday on the 5th of April, and the New York Times, the whole page on the Hinckley family. And I typed, like the headline of the Washington Post, "An aimless road to a place in history, Hinckley's Odyssey and Troubles." See, then I listed what they leave out, that it wasn't necessarily aimless. He was protected by the judge in Nashville, Tennessee. He's protected by the FBI who don't fingerprint him. He's protected by his travels. As soon as the guns go off, he's taken to a Marine base. He doesn't have to go to ordinary jail.
Protected by the FBI.
He's
also,
protected by...
because they didn't furnish his name to the Secret Service.
Never fingerprinted him. And he's protected by the CIA. He gets the most expensive attorney in the United States. He's protected by the courts that locked up all of his belongings and writings that should be available for a case, because now if Reagan isn't dead, of course you're not going to expose that. But I spent the entire week just listing, like the Washington Post, this is their great article, Chip Brown and Neil Henry. Failure to graduate from college, failure to get a job, failure to measure to his brother and sister, failure to connect with his father, failure to distinguish life from art, failure to be recognized by Jodie Foster.
Oswald again, all this failure.
So what I said is success. He obtained 7 weapons and traveled all over the country with them. Success. He was caught with 3 guns and 50 rounds of ammunition and was never fingerprinted at the airport. Success. He took courses on Adolf Hitler and Mein Kampf and slave labor in Auschwitz, where no other colleges hardly teach German Nazi history in any places that I know of. Success in locating Jodie Foster and finding the door to put notes under her, which would be very difficult at college like Yale, with a guy who's freaked out, at least as spacey as the one I saw in front of my house. After 10 minutes, I said, "Go, you're danger to me." Success at having his own car and driving around without ever being seen and nobody knowing where he gets his gas. Success in getting 50 hollow bullets and inflicting almost mortal wounds and not being announced for days that they're in these people. Mm-hmm. Success to find out where the president would be at that moment, which is pretty hard to do. And success to get in and out of college, never having debts or any problems paying your airline fees, living in California 2 or 3 years, no job in his life, traveling. They mentioned Delta Airlines, American Airlines, flying around, buying 1 gun for 100. All they did, they mentioned 3 little items he hawked, like they found a pawn shop, a $15 silver watch in Hollywood Boulevard 5 years ago. And they can't find where he bought gas or if he was in front of my house in January. Isn't that like Oswald, the most minute details of babysitters, success at traveling to Texas, Chicago, St. Louis, Dallas, Nashville, New York, New Haven, Washington, D.C., never saying who took his picture in front of the White House, who he saw in Washington, D.C., his links. Success when he was arrested, not taken to an ordinary jail with other homicide cases. As I said before, getting his top lawyer. Where did he fail? I asked the question to myself. Yeah. He almost got Haig and Fritz Kramer's protege into office, and Bush, director of the CIA. Maybe this is what he wanted to do. Maybe he is helping a group of people that have claimed since the Kennedy assassination, and in volume 17 and 18 verbatim, if we did 8 or 10 murders, we would control the United States. Maybe he's doing just what he likes to do. Why? I don't see any inkling that he suffered.
That's right, and he was successful in getting in with the TV crew there. When you need a Secret Service press card. Not just an ordinary press card, but you have to have clearance with the Secret Service to get in there.
Of course. I mean, these wanderers, you just don't wander, and they take down the guardrail and so forth. You just,
of course,
everything that he wanted that would prove to a certain group of people, say that Reagan had to be done away with, every door was open for him. Mm-hmm. And people were predicting from the time Reagan won the election that he wouldn't live out his term, that it would be 3 or 4 months. And here's this guy at the right time, the right place, and Reagan still isn't out of the woods.
Yeah. And Time magazine is still at their old tricks. I mean, this article in the recent one showing this cartoon picture of Reagan and the trying to present, I think the word madness is in the title, and they're trying to suggest that the country is mad. That's why presidents get killed. In other words, there's kind of illness, and that we're all guilty somehow.
Yeah,
that propaganda campaign is very dangerous, because when if we're feeling guilt about firearms or something like that, then we tend not to be active in rectifying situations. Guilt is a very harmful emotion in that sense. You feel guilty, so you give up control.
Yes.
And they're trying to make Americans feel guilty for
this violence.
And
all of these assassinations. Right. Is America violent? And yet, if they would write those editorials after they've accounted for who took his picture, such as when E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy broke into Dr. Fielding's office, they had their picture. It was very common for the Nazis to be photographed where they did things and how they did them. They kept a record of everything. And he's smiling in front of the White House. And until the FBI or the Justice Department says who took the picture and what date and where he stayed and what phone calls he received, how can they say within 2 days that he's the loner? The Secret Service was directly across the street from the hotel that he stayed in, the headquarters. Yeah. And they make note that he's near the White House, but they don't say he's near the Secret Service office, and that the agents were always over at the hotel having drinks.
Does that remind you of Oswald passing out supposedly pro-Castro leaflets out of the same building that housed the CIA office in New Orleans?
In New Orleans. That was another parallel, is that by Lee Harvey Oswald being seen with an altercation there, they could say that he had confrontations with the law enforcement, that he was having pro-Castro pamphlets. And as soon as he was put in jail, he called the FBI and said, "Let me out." Well, I think a parallel here, and I think you'd agree, is that going through Nashville and apprehended with these weapons the day Carter was there made it look like he's stalking or assimilated to Carter, so that if he shoots Reagan, it's a senseless thing. The media twisted around that it was just senseless.
They keep using that word all the time.
Senseless and wandering. Sirhan, the wanderer. They wander, but what motels, they find the tackiest witnesses, like a maintenance man from a dormitory 5 years ago can have instant recall that all the shades were closed and he only had a TV. He may have had the shades closed, just like when Howard Hughes' room, all the shades were closed over the window so that nobody from an airplane could take a photograph of who was in the room. This is the truth. In the upper floors, they put boards over every window when they were wondering who was in those rooms, and black curtains. So for Howard Hughes, it's normal, but for Hinckley, it's a sign of a withdrawn inner person.
Right. Like if a guy's robbing a liquor store and he kills the clerk, they don't say senseless murder. I mean, that's not senseless. He's killing the clerk in order to rob the store. But when somebody kills a president, it's a senseless killing.
Sherman Scully believes that Hinckley can be attached to a man in Chicago, and possibly he was involved in a murder in a Jew in Chicago in 1977. He's putting this together, that Hinckley was working with the Nazi Party and an agent from the CIA who traveled all around the world. But the adjectives that we get with John Kennedy and all the others that we don't have time to go into with Hinckley, the wanderer, the loner, the senseless, the searching for history.
And of course, they try to say that about Oswald, but we know too much about the real Oswald now. We know about the intelligence man at Atsugi Naval Base, the man who we have him on tape speaking excellent English, speaking beautifully. And I have no doubt that we'll find out that Hinckley may have some of the same background that Oswald had. His connections with intelligence. Well, you've already established some.
Well, I was wondering about a group that went to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the oil people, all of the people left. There are two areas that I've always pursued with the Kennedy assassination that I believe separated me from the intelligence agents that pretended to be doing the work. And one was the Torbett document with the missionary in the church front particularly Albert Osborne from Nashville, Tennessee, who ran a Nazi camp of Boy Scouts funded through Permindex with his headquarters in Jamaica at Tyrol Bay, who was on the bus with Lee Harvey Oswald into Mexico. And the missionary that he had were not religious scout people, but assassins working with Division 5 of the FBI. Now, that was an area that very few people would use, and when I called Robert Blakey of the House Select Committee and said, do you have the Torbett document, he said, I won't answer you. I said, I'll send it to you. He said, I won't answer you, and he hung up. And it's interesting because this family, the Hinckley family, were devoutly Christian and working with the World Vision Group, which is a missionary group around the world in 85 countries that could possibly be an umbrella cloak for the intelligence operation. A religious, they call it third world, but they mention Nigeria and Brazil and other non-third world countries. And is this the kind of missionary Christian group that funded Albert Osborne? Christian church groups from California, the Southwest, Oregon, all listed in the Warren Commission hearings, sending money to a man in Tennessee that they thought was a religious person, and he in turn gave it to assassins. And at the time that Hinckley went through Tennessee, when he was apprehended at the airport with handcuffs and 50 rounds of hollow ammunition and 3 guns, they let him off in 34 minutes, and his brother went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, and then to Singapore for an oil company, so that there's a ball of wax here. And the other area of the Kennedy assassination that people, Lane and Sylvia Marr and the other researchers, wouldn't touch was all that information in the volumes, volume 18, page 700 and 800, of the links of men brought from Germany, military intelligence, into the Dallas area meeting with the CIA. There's a whole can of worms of people that had youth groups that would be very useful for future murders, and I wonder if in the 10 years after John Kennedy was killed, they picked up these young people, like these Hinkleys, John Hinckley, who came from arch-conservative, redneck, really Nazi mentality, the G. Gordon Liddy mentality, and that their son was not a bad branch off of their tree, but a part of the family tree, working more actively for getting the show on the road of getting a real fascist coup in this country, moving Reagan out. So that this neo-Nazi group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I'll do more of it on other tapes, was the Hinckley family part of that milieu? What is the unfinished business of Dallas, like the missionaries, the church fronts, the assassination teams, which overlaps with the Hinckley family now with the missionaries and the untold money. In 1973-74, when Hinckley moved to Denver, Colorado, according to the Wall Street Journal, he was bankrupt. He had no money. And then Vanderbilt Energy all of a sudden came into a lot of money. And those were the same years where the Australian CIA money with narcotics and the Phoenix program and the assassination teams was dispersing money. And is the unfinished business of the Mo Dallas, Castle Bank, Giancana, Rosselli, even though they're dead, are those people still working for that one world fascism, as against what they call the one world Rockefeller communism? The far right considers David Rockefeller a one world giveaway, and anything that touches him as a communist one world, whereas they have said we will assassinate or kill to make sure we're not in the clutches of, say, Chase Manhattan. So is the Hinckley group out of that fabric that began when Kennedy was killed? They lived right in the neighborhood. They were there till 74.
If that connection exists, how arrogant, how audacious these people are. I mean, you know, the connection between the Hinckley and the vice president is so close. I mean, they must have a lot of they must have a lot of confidence to
Well, it'd be as audacious as on November 23rd if Lee Harvey Oswald's daughter is having dinner with Lyndon Johnson's daughter at the ranch. if she were old enough. If Rachel was 20 and is having lunch with Lyndon's daughter on the 23rd. If Oswald, yes, I think to have this person arrested and airlifted to a military base and then hire the law office of Williams and Connolly, when Connolly was so much a part of the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination. And Williams, their attorney, was covering up the Bobby Baker, the Lyndon Johnson connections, the Connolly, the Watergate. He's been the attorney for this whole ball of wax. So that beyond the ballistics, you get into the oil energy, connecting links of the family, the neighborhood they lived in, H.L. Hunt's, the extreme right wing, and the media tries to present Hinckley as being a kid that somehow went sour. And we were talking about this before. The Texas rule of thumb was kill. Why, even Lyndon Johnson, our own president, was suspected of murdering the man whose seat he took. The plays on Broadway, like McBird. Why do we talk about South Korea? The literature that came out naming Lyndon Johnson as taking over because of the murder. There's some people that dare say it here. So I think the comparisons to Dallas, they exist because they haven't been cleaned up. Don't you think so?
That's right. And I think if Dallas had been studied at the time, these shots would never have been fired at Reagan.
That's right. And if it were studied today, it would stop more shots.
That's right.
It would get us back away from the bullets or blackmail and into the election box again and having a free choice. The people innocently, I said this to the Republicans when they would put me down for doing research on the Kennedy assassination. I said, just wait till you get the man in that you want and see how long he lives. See if you really have a choice in this country. And a lot of Republicans began to see a little better, I think, in the last week and a half.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's going to throw a lot of light on the kind of hidden government that's speaking right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry our hour is over. I think we could do about 10 or 20 hours on the similarities. They never end. But it begins with the ballistics and then gets deeper into specific people and places and time. Thank you very much, Ray, for being here.
It's my
really
pleasure,
great.
May. It's always fun to talk to you.
Okay. This is Mae Brussel and Carmel. You take care, and I'll be back with you next week.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussel. This program originates from Carmel, California.
And we'll have more on the Reagan assassination attempt in a future episode. But for me, I'm St. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show from the other side of the mountain on the best side of midnight. I wish you peace.
Mm-hmm.